This episode is powered by Specialized Recruiting Group in Livonia, helping businesses find top-tier talent and professionals land their next big opportunity. Welcome to Ghosted by the Machine, the podcast where job seekers break through the algorithm and finally get heard. No filters, no bots, just real conversations about what's actually happening in today's hiring system. I'm your host, Mark Lane, and today our guest spends a lot of time helping recruiting teams communicate better with candidates. Katrina Kibben is the founder of 3 Years Media and someone who's built her career around improving how organizations write, speak, and show up in the hiring process. Katrina, welcome to Ghosted by the Machine.
Thanks, Mark. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, when you look at hiring today, what do you think recruiters are actually getting right and where are they still missing the mark?
Yeah, I could probably answer that question for an hour because I think this is that moment where AI has held up a mirror to a lot of recruiting processes that just didn't work. And so where I think recruiting is getting it right now is that they're starting to focus on doing what works instead of doing the same thing they've always done. Taking that one step back and, for example, being able to use tools to use video interviewing with second choice candidates so that we get more information on them so a maybe doesn't turn into a no. And so I really love seeing that. I think that's where recruiters are actually getting it right and starting to give more people a chance by using tools. But alternatively, I think where we're still getting it wrong is that recruiters are emphasizing speed over everything, right? So they're all about making the pile smaller and the tools are incentivizing that, right? They're like faster, 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 but faster was never the problem. Getting the right answer at the end, meaning did we hire the best person for the job? That's the real problem we should be solving for.
Well, many candidates that I've spoken to, and we talked about this earlier, myself included, say the applications feel like they disappear into a black hole, or sometimes what I jokingly call the cheese grater. From the recruiting side, what's actually happening behind the scenes that job seekers don't see?
Yeah. So it goes back to that time element and why recruiters are feeling so pressed for time. So what's happening behind the scenes is that we are seeing a 100% or more lift in volume of applications. Meaning, if I got 100 applications for a role like this last year, this time I got 200. But in some cases, that's turning into 1,000 applications. And if you don't have tools for screening or getting through that pile, there's a person sitting behind that, taking a list that's sometimes stack ranked, meaning a machine kind of went through and said, I think this is a better match than this one based off of those keywords. Most people are looking at a list that is not organized in any way and having to go through every single one of those and what they would call disposition that resume, meaning yes or no. Yes or no. Do I want to talk to this person? And knowing that they're looking at a really big pile, how would you approach a giant pile if you were sitting in front of it and you had a timeline of having a short list of 6 by the end of the week? Most recruiters, I'm not saying this is right, but I'm saying this is what happens, right? When they find the 6, let's say they promised they would have 5 on a slate, meaning a short list of candidates. When they find 5, they're done. And that means that the people who fall after that, the people who didn't get reviewed, often get nothing because there aren't a lot of great ways and systems built up in most applicant tracking systems to mass message you in any way.
How did we get to this? That's the big question that I hear is, you used to be able to give your resume to someone, or you knew someone here or knew someone there. Hey, can you take my resume in? There's no personal interaction. That human element is gone, especially, getting that feedback. I'd like to get feedback. Why didn't my resume get through the ATS? Or did it get through and I was one of the 50 out of 500 that applied? So these things, these questions come up daily.
Yeah. And I think we got here kind of from 2 places. I think from a tech angle, we got here because everyone knew hiring was broken, but only a specific segment stepped up to fix it. And most of those people have very little recruiting experience. They are former hiring managers and technologists who saw a business opportunity and tried to force fit marketing solutions into recruiting problems. And recruiting is not marketing. Recruiting is the hardest marketing job in the world, if you want to think of it that way, because marketers take a message, and if 1% of the world says this is cool, you're one of the biggest brands in the whole world. Recruiters take everyone in the world and narrow it down to one person. That is a fundamentally different challenge and one that will not be solved with the same tool set. On the other side, I think there's a cultural issue here, is that we go through these cycles where there's such limited mindset and headlines and scare tactics that happen that it makes corporations treat job seekers as if they are lucky to get a job. And that is toxic AF. Okay.
Yeah.
I will restrain my language on that because that mindset is so toxic to think. And what ultimately the consequence is that process that I'm talking you through, it becomes like an obstacle course instead of an entryway. And the point of hiring is to open an entryway, to have the most qualified people walk through it and to make a selection, not to hire the person who is most capable of hopping over the obstacles we created.
Well, I can tell you that those obstacles is a big course. It's a big obstacle course for a lot of us. So you've talked a lot about writing better job postings in your books and in your speeches. In a world where AI and ATS systems filter resumes before a human ever reviews them, do job descriptions matter more than ever, or have they actually become a part of the problem?
Yeah, so I think the job post is the first great example of the obstacle that's completely unnecessary because, as you know, these job postings are thousands of words. They barely make sense. My favorite is when they hold contradictions at the beginning and the middle, right? Like they'll say something at the beginning and then immediately contradict that skill or need right through the middle of it. And you're like, what is this? And so I would tell any jobs, as a job post writing expert, I would tell any job seeker to treat it as a preview, not an absolute. All right. So what I want you to look at that job posting as, if you are 70% qualified that you can do the work that is itemized in that job posting, I want you to apply anyway. So that's tip number one, apply anyway. Okay. Because remember, most people do not know how to write a good job posting. So if you're a little lost, that's because the recruiter probably was too. And I think the second piece is that you have to know that recruiter technology, most of it is automated based off of the content of that job posting. So as much as I think 75% of it might be BS, it is 100% the data that they are using to speed up the systems that I've been talking about. And there's some source of truth that they think is real, and they're using that as a baseline to match you against good. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I totally understand that. I mean,
Yeah.
I see, all the jobs that I've applied to, they'll say, this is the overview of the job. And then once you get to the interview, it's not the same. They've added more or taken some out. I don't understand why they do that, but you see that a lot on LinkedIn.
Yes. And that's why I encourage anyone who gets that first phone screen call, and when they ask you, do you have any questions for me? The question you should ask every single time, two of them. Number one, walk me through a day in the life. I wake up, I get dressed, now what? Have them walk you through that level of detail and summarize, because if they can't answer that question, they probably don't know what they're hiring for. And it'll at least give you an understanding of what they know about the role.
Right.
The second question I want you to ask is there anything that's missing from this job posting that you think is important for me to know? Both can be very, very helpful. Again, because all I can say for 100% certainty is that job post probably isn't all the information that you need. And both of those questions are going to help you get clarity.
So one thing we hear from job seekers all the time is that emotional side of being ghosted or not getting any feedback. So when someone spends hours applying or interviewing and they never hear back, it hurts and it creates self-doubt. Do you think organizations fully appreciate the impact, the psychological impact that silence can have on their candidates?
Absolutely not. And they most certainly do not understand the impact of rejection at scale, because we as humans are not very rejection tolerant. And that's because from the time you're a baby, you learn how to react to people's emotions and expressions and all of these things. So we're hardwired to have that. And then you remove reciprocation. And what happens when you remove that interaction between two people when we're making a decision about another person is that space that is created on the other side when I ghost you is doubt. And doubt at scale is so toxic to a job search. And so I really think, number one, no, they don't get it. But alternatively, it's a reminder to every candidate that the things that you do in your downtime when you are job seeking need to be things that really pour into your confidence bucket.
So if you could change one thing about the process, something that would improve the experience for both recruiters and candidates, what would that be?
Yeah. It would be the email that you get after you apply. So in my dream world, you would, this is tough because I also think the application process could use a lot of love, but let me stick with my first answer. So in that email, in my dream world, what they would communicate with you is a timeline for the decision-making process on this role. So what it would say is, hey, we don't respond to every applicant we get because we get a very high volume of applications. But here's the timeline that we're going to follow and when you can expect to hear from us if you are moving forward in this process. So by this date, we will close this job to applications. If you're applying past this date, we are no longer accepting applications. I'm sorry you got here. Then it will say when the interview is happening. It will give an estimate of when the offer will be made. It will give a timeline of how many people move on through each and really giving the statistical chances of your resume at each step so that you know how close you're getting. Okay. And I would also set expectations about how I can use your resume in the future. Oh, and then I might actually do that. So here's what I'm talking about. If I apply to your job and I'm really qualified for the next job that you open up, I want to be considered for that role. And I want to create the easiest line between a talented person and the next job, knowing that there's a very high likelihood this email I'm sending is going to get rejected.
I would feel a lot better to see that. And
Right?
AI should be able to help them with that.
It's
And they're not
so
thinking of
easy.
it. Yes.
Yep.
I get those 3:00 on Sunday morning Dear John letters. Thank you for
Yeah.
applying. We appreciate your application. We'll keep it on file. There's no feedback. There's no nothing. And then the following week, you start getting phone calls from spam.
Yeah.
So you wonder if that information that you provided for them is now being used as human capital, which I've heard about that too. That's a part of the process.
And if you're a recruiter and you're really trying to think about the future of your career and the future of your pipeline, whether you're at this company or not,
or your company and the backlash you might receive,
that I actually think the biggest problem they're going to face soon is getting attention because AI is making the world really noisy. In the first 2 years of AI existing, of ChatGPT and generative AI being available to the public, they published more content than had been printed since the print press. Okay? If you think that doesn't make it harder to get one person to find one job, you're crazy.
Right.
And that database to me becomes the most valuable thing that you have because it means that we can start from pre-screened. We can start from pre-reviewed resumes. We can source internally from this huge database. And then there's no lag time of just like letting jobs float around in the ether. And you can actually build relationships with candidates. And that, to me, that is the ultimate opportunity where if you and I have brand preference, I build trust with you before you even get a job. I bet you never leave.
You're probably right. How you're treated in that process, and if you get the position, is going to lead to longevity in that career, in that job that you have. I truly believe that.
Especially if you're long-term unemployed.
I went through 5 interviews with a car manufacturer. 5 interviews. And it took them 4 weeks to get back to me to say, thank you very much. And I had to call someone that I knew there to find out, why, what happened. Well, they felt you were overqualified and blah, blah, blah. Overqualified.
The illusion of the overqualified candidate is probably also in my top 3 of things that I would change about recruiting because in what world is having someone who is highly qualified to do a job a negative? I will never understand that. As long as we can meet salary expectations about the role and timeline, right? i.e., if this job doesn't take you 40 hours a week, we will still compensate you for those 40 hours because that's the agreement that we're going to make. I feel like there's no world in which I would not want someone who is highly qualified or more than qualified to do that job in that role.
Yeah, are we looking at an age? Are we, what are we looking at here? Is it ageism?
That's
Is
it.
it salary requirements? We're looking for someone half the experience that you have because we think they'll stay longer in that position. There's all these different variables that you have to think about. And again, the emotional side of being the applicant, you're like, what do I do now?
And there's no data that supports younger people stay, but we can talk about that some other time, Mark.
Well, Katrina, thank you so much for being part of the conversation today and for bringing the recruiter's perspective into the topic. And that's really why we do the show, to connect what's happening inside hiring teams and what job seekers are experiencing on the outside. So if you're watching or listening and thinking, hey, that sounds like me, that sounds like my experience, you're not alone. If you'd like to share your story, feel free to email me or DM me anytime. And if you want to stay plugged into the real stories, real insights, and real humans behind today's hiring system, make sure to follow and subscribe for new episodes, shorts, and conversations every week. And if your organization believes in making hiring more human and wants to support conversations like this, we're currently opening a few sponsorship spots, so feel free to reach out. I'm Mark Lane, and this is Ghosted by the Machine, because behind every application, there is a human. Let's make hiring human again. Katrina, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.